Hello, Pastor Jay here, and I'm joined by Jenny Hunt. Jenny heads up our mercy ministry at Scarlet City, and as we think of engaging in our present cultural moment, a lot of it comes down to one of the things we've talked about at Scarlet City is what does it look like to love our neighbor, both in social distancing and preventing the spread of COVID-19, but then also thinking of ways to practically serve and bless those who are in need in this season. And so I'm really excited to have you here, Jenny, and talk through this. Can you share with us, just before we talk through the details, what a kind of lens of viewing the situation from kind of 30,000 feet?
Yeah, so as I have been praying about this the last few days especially, there have sort of been three things that I have been thinking about and praying about when it comes to that question. I think the first is that in things like this, our tendency can really be to turn inward. And I think that's natural, and I don't think we need to feel guilty that is where our human nature leads us, that we worry, that we wonder, that the uncertainty of all of this is really difficult. But I think there's really an invitation to look outward, that in the gospel there is this reality that because we have been redeemed and because we have been freed and because we have seen God work in our lives, we are free to look outward even in uncertain times and to see the invitation that he is offering to us to engage with that and to see needs outside of our own personal lives. And I think too, as I've thought about that there's even some freedom there. I think there can be in that inward focus some anxiety that can even get worse, and maybe even in that outward focus there can be a little bit of freedom from that, or not completely, right? Like that's a part of walking in uncertainty, but I do think that there can be some sweetness in looking out and asking God to see or to show us what opportunities there are. And then the second thing I've been thinking about is this weird tension between sacrifice and submission. So we want to be willing to sacrifice. We want to be willing to lay some of our preferences and comforts down. But at the same time, we have leaders in government and in public health giving us these recommendations. And so we really want to find the space where those two things overlap. So where are the places that our sacrifice overlaps this idea of what we've been asked to consider and to follow? And so we want to look for that. We want to identify where those places are. We don't want to do things that are going to be counterproductive, but we do want to be willing to sacrifice and to see beyond ourselves. And then the last thing I've been thinking about is just how much we need creativity. I just feel like I keep saying to people, these are crazy times, like these are weird, it is. I don't think anybody knows what to do, what to expect, and so obviously it follows that we really need insight and creativity to think about what does it look like for us to be a presence of peace, to be a presence of helpers in the midst of this. We need to be creative in that.
I like that, because I feel like a lot of times pastors and churches can come across, when we think about mission and serving the community, like here's the playbook, go and do this. And what you're proposing is, and that creative piece is, how's God worked in you? What are some opportunities you might have? And what can that look like for you to take personal ownership, to not just do what we're asking? And that's when mission gets fun. So now thinking on some of the concrete ways, what are some practical, someone who's like, all right, I want to serve, I want to be outward focused in wise, not foolish ways. What are a few concrete ways someone can do that?
So, first, prayer. I don't think we can overemphasize the importance of that right now. We need to be in that quiet place before God, being really honest about our own fears and anxieties, our own uncertainties, but bringing those to Him in lament, in petition, in just real honesty, I think. And then I think that really leads us into praying about our community, our country, our world, asking God to intervene, and then asking God for wisdom about how we can be involved in that. And so getting that posture right, in a sense, the posture of trusting that it is God who is in control, not us. The posture of looking to Him and asking Him to move, but also the posture of listening and wanting to hear from Him on steps that we can take. And then I think there's a really big kind of personal element of this, which we've already talked about. And, I think, some of the things that we're going to be doing aren't like on these big scale organized things because of that submission piece. And so I think for each of us, it looks like starting with our own spheres, our neighbors. Where do we have in our spheres people who have needs? How can we creatively inquire about those needs? So that if it's, helping with childcare for somebody who's in our neighborhood or our community who needs to be in the hospital or working in some kind of essential capacity right now, can we help with that? Are there people in our neighborhoods or communities where, who are elderly or, compromised in some way, and we can meet some needs, go to the grocery store, help with some of those things? Are there kids, even older kids who need help with this new thing that we're navigating with not having schools in session, whether that's with technology or homework help or just kind of checking in. Maybe they're in high school, but their parents are working and they just maybe need somebody to check in on them. Those kinds of things, I think, again, maybe aren't happening on this huge organized scale, but there are huge needs, and if each of us would own that we could play a small part in that, that's huge. I mean, it's huge to think about the ripple effect of that and just the individual relationships that could be impacted by that kind of reaching out. So maybe it's, writing up some notes and leaving them in your, around on people's doors or porches or knocking on doors or just reaching out. A lot of us maybe already have, like a group chat with some neighbors, being proactive in some of those things to communicate that availability. And then I think as a church too, we do want to be thinking about resources that we can point you to. One in particular that we'll provide for you is a link to a Sign Up Genius that the CRC has put out. So our local community resource center has some things that they're doing, and they've just kind of said, if you want to volunteer, here are some ways that you can do that. Prepping food, delivering groceries, things like that. And so that's a great resource. We want you to have that. It's an organization that we trust and we support, and so we want to point you in that direction if you're looking for something like that. We are still offering our community meal tomorrow night, and so that will be a way that we can kind of support some people in that way, that it'll just look different. People will come and kind of pick up a to-go meal. But again, there are some things that we do want to do. We just want to recognize that we're always wanting to be sensitive to what's the wisest way forward.
Kind of last question. As we think of loving our neighbor, we at Scarlet City, we're committed to justice and mercy. We want to love our people, no strings attached, because they're children of God and created in His image. Yeah. But also recognizing the spiritual reality. I think situations like this bring people to a place where they're thinking about deep things, and the spiritual antenna might be up more than usual. Any thought on how to have spiritual conversations with people, maybe even initiate prayer for non-believers, like how to kind of have those deeper level spiritual conversations with people who might not otherwise be open to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is back to what I was saying earlier about prayer. I think that needs to be a huge part of how we're praying right now, is that God would give us eyes to see where he's working in people, and then give us courage to enter into those spaces that he's created for people to ask these questions and to be thinking about these things. I think that's huge. I think we've got to depend on the Spirit in that. And also, I think that, like you're saying, there's this kind of desperation. Actually, my dad and I were talking this weekend about the desperation that some of these early followers of Jesus, portrayed. We were looking at the scene where Jesus calls some of the disciples. He tells them to, put the nets out, and they're not really sure what to do, but they do it. And then their first reaction when they get all these fish is basically they're like, well, we're a mess. We're sinners. We don't even associate with us. It's like their initial thought is about their own desperation, and that is where they can meet Jesus. And the contrast then we were talking about is, the Pharisees and people who did not want to acknowledge need or deep need. They wanted to be able to, fix it, to make themselves righteous. And so the big difference between those who pursued Jesus and were drawn to Jesus versus those who became kind of enemies of Jesus was this desperation. Our awareness of our need and our willingness to enter into that. And I think that as a culture, we tend to be over here, right? We want to fix it, we want to do it, we want to be self-sufficient. And this, in a really profound way, has brought us into this space where we are acknowledging our need, that we can't keep ourselves physically safe against all odds. We can try, but we can't know that for sure, that we are coming to the end of these things that, we have in place that we can trust, systems for our kids, systems for our own employment, all of these things that we trust to work in a certain way. It's like they're kind of not falling apart in an ultimate sense, but temporarily there is that real sense of losing a lot of that. And so could we as the church come into those spaces with our own acknowledgement of our need and how Jesus has met us in that need? And could we share about that? Could we hold space for people who are struggling with facing their need? And could we trust God to really use that? Because I think he will. I think that there are some profound ways that he could speak to people in this acknowledgement of need that so much in our culture in a normal setting distracts us from, but that need is always there, and so it's being uncovered. And so we can, and I hope we do, enter into that with people who God has placed in our lives.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this. If you have questions in the email or on the Facebook post, we're going to put Jenny's email. If you have practical questions about serving and, is this just sacrifice but not submission, how to live into that tension, we want to be here. You can email me as well. We'd love to resource you. And also, I just want to invite you this Sunday. We're going to be having our worship gathering, not here, but we're working on streaming that. You can pray for that. There's some things that are required for that. We hope to have that ready for Sunday. If not this Sunday, maybe in the future. And we're for you. Thank you so much for joining God's Story with us. And we're going to have Jenny. This is a thing that changes quickly, and so we might be meeting. We might present another video next week, or as facts come around, we'll continue to connect with you.